Today we're continuing our study in Second Samuel. This, have you ever been in a place where you feel like you're hitting your head against the wall and everything just seems to be going from bad to worse and it's just awful? And it's really common in those kind of situations to ask, where is God? Where is God in all of this? And when I was going through one of the darkest times of my life, one of the only scriptures I could read at the time was Psalm 139. And this is a section of it. And it answers that question, where is God in these horrible times? It says, I'm going to make this bigger so you can see it. Where can I go from your spirit, O Lord? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there too. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me, and the light around me becomes night, even the darkness is not dark to you, and the night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you. So the question of where is God? He's there with you in the midst of the hard times. He's still there. So really a better question to ask is, what is God doing in these difficult circumstances? And that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to see how the Lord how the Lord is at work in the difficult circumstances in David's life. Just to catch you up, we're continuing the life of David. God had promised him in a covenant, I will give you rest from all your enemies, and he did. And then David had an affair with Bathsheba and had her husband Uriah killed, and that was a problem. And God said, this is not right. And in fact, there's consequences for that. And some of those consequences were, let's see, verse 10, now therefore the sword will never depart from your house, because you despised me and took the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your own. Out of your own household I will bring calamity upon you. That's all the hard times. And then jumping to 13, David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Nathan replied, the Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die. But because you did this and shown utter contempt for the Lord through your sin, there's still going to be consequences. And that's where we pick up with these horrible things that are about to happen. And David's about to go through that really rock and a hard place situation. But we're going to see the Lord is still at work, even in these circumstances in David's life. Now, if you would like family Bible studies based on these Sunday videos, click the QR code or the link in the description to join the PRM, Parent Road Ministries e-team. Hi, friends. I'm Miss Nancy Ruth.
And I'm Mr. Roger.
We want to see kids living for Jesus. Now, this is a really long passage. I just listened to it one more time. It took me about an hour to listen to all of these chapters, just to remember what we're talking about today. So I'm going to skim through a lot of this, paraphrase a lot of this, and we're not going to cover everything. We're going to cover parts of it, but I want us to see how the Lord is still at work in these circumstances. The first thing we see is that nothing is a surprise to God. I'm going to say that again. Nothing is a surprise to God. And he even warned David this was coming. But there's some surprises coming. So here we go. Absalom was David's third son, and he had a sister named Tamar. Okay. And Tamar was the half-sister of Amnon, who is David's oldest. And Amnon hurt Tamar when she was caring for him when he was sick, and it was a really bad situation. And so Absalom ended up killing his brother Amnon over it. And then he had to run away because he, would face judgment for that. And he was gone for 3 years. And he ran up to Geshur, which is where his mother was from, and stayed with his grandfather, the king, up there. So after the 3 years, or during those 3 years, David was not only mourning the loss of his oldest son, but also mourning the loss of Absalom, who was still alive, but far from him. So he got over his grief from the son that was dead, but was still really longing for his long-lost son, Absalom. So Joab finally got sent and brought Absalom back to Jerusalem, but David said, okay, bring him back, but and he didn't go behind the king's back. Okay, he went with the king's permission to go get Absalom, but the king said, he's not allowed to see my face. He can come back, but he can't see my face. And that was the situation for 2 years, until finally it worked out where Absalom was allowed to come back into the king's presence, and they made up. David kissed him on the cheeks, and so he was accepted back as the king's son, and they were in good relationship once again. However, Absalom was a bit two-faced about this, because once he was back in the king's good graces, he had other plans. He was exalting himself, setting himself up. Check this out. He was setting himself up to make the king look bad and himself look good. So whenever anyone came to Jerusalem seeking justice from the king, like they had a grievance, they had something that was going on, and I need you to do something about this, king. And they would come to Jerusalem to seek the king's counsel and have him pass that judgment and make things right. And that was part of the king's job. Well, when they were coming, already upset, Absalom was sitting there waiting and would talk with them. And he said, as he was talking with them, he would say this. He would say, Absalom would add, "Oh, if only I were appointed judge in the land. Then everyone who had a complaint or a case could come to me, and I would see that they received justice." And he was implying that the king could not give justice in this situation, not like he could. He could give, if only, see the sarcasm here, if only someone would appoint me to that position. Oh my goodness. He was definitely jockeying for his position as working his way up to become king himself, and not waiting until his father had died, but setting himself up to be king now. Okay. But he was patient. He did this for 4 years, and he just kept at this. And not only that, but he had something else going for him. Check this out. It says, in all Israel, there was not a man so highly praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the top of his head to the sole of his foot, there was no blemish in him. He was the model of male beauty. And it said he had lots of hair. He would cut it once a year, and it weighed all this amount, and he just had all this hair. Okay, that's why I picked the long-haired guy to be Absalom. Okay, remember there's no cameras back then, so that's just a guess. All right, and so between all of this, the sitting by the gate and saying, "Oh, but I could do so much better than the king. Oh, I would do this," and setting himself up and the good looks and things. Through all of that, he stole the hearts of the people Israel away from David, and thinking Absalom is better leader than David. Then Absalom got the king's permission to go to Hebron. Now, if you remember, Hebron was David's early capital before he conquered Jerusalem. Okay, so this is very strategic on Absalom's part. And he tricked the king into letting him go to Hebron. He didn't tell him the real reason he was going. And so the king sent him. And along the way, Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel, the whole land. As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, Absalom is king in Hebron. And he had them do that as soon as he left Jerusalem. Then they were supposed to go ahead and do that. Oh my goodness. And he brought a whole bunch of people with him, and not all of them understood that this was part of a conspiracy, but he still had a whole bunch of people with him. So he had all the pomp and circumstance. He was entering like a king in Hebron. Not only that, he sent word for Ahithophel. Ahithophel was David's counselor, the one that gave him really good advice about what to do. And so he switched sides from being David's counselor and close. So they had a close relationship, but he turned his back on David and turned to Absalom to be his counselor instead. And later in this long passage we're studying, it says that the counsel of Ahithophel, the advice that he gave, was like the word of God himself. So it was really good counsel that the Lord gave him that always was good. No need to question it. Oh my goodness, that's quite a powerhouse to have in your corner. And it says, and so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's followers kept increasing. That's a lot. And it was a surprise to David. He found out about this with all the rest of the nation when the trumpeters, the messengers went out and said, Absalom is king of Hebron. David didn't know all this was going on behind his back, but God knew. God still knew this was happening. And here's our second thing. God provides help we need. God provides the help we need if we're willing to take it. God provides the help we need if we're willing to take it, because the Lord is still at work in difficult circumstances. So word gets to Jerusalem, David, you better, this stuff's happening here. And so David said, oh, this is not good. We need to evacuate the city and get everybody to safety, because Absalom is coming for Jerusalem, and he's going to hurt people coming into the city if we're not gone. And so he left with his whole household, all his wives and his children, but also all the people faithful to him also left Jerusalem. So it was a mass exodus from Jerusalem, evacuation. And included in that were Zadok and Abiathar, who were priests, and they brought the Ark of the Covenant from the tabernacle with them to escape the city, and they were faithful to David. And David, once they got out of the city and everybody got safely out of the city, and they were still on the run, so they hadn't they were out of the city, but they were still had further to go. David, had to cross a river, and David said, "Okay, Zadok and Abiathar, I know you're faithful to me. I need you to go back to the city, and I want you to be spies for me and let me know what's going on because you'll be able to be there and tell me what's happening. So I need you to go back to the city and be spies for me." And he said to take the ark of God back to the city too. I love this statement of faith. This shows us that David knew God was still at work in these circumstances. Watch this. "Take the ark of God back to the city," the king said. "If I find favor in the Lord's eyes, he will bring me back and let me see it and his dwelling place again. But if he says, I am not pleased with you, then I am ready. Let him do to me whatever seems good to him." So he's trusting in the Lord. But I want you to notice Zadok and Abiathar were willing to just leave with the king. But David saw that this was help in the situation that God had provided, which is why he sent Zadok and Abiathar back to Jerusalem. So that's part of the help that God provided. Continuing on, we just said that. All right, so I just find this interesting. This is a little freebie. As David was leaving Jerusalem, it says specifically that he went through the Mount of Olives. If you remember, that's where the Garden of Gethsemane was, where Jesus prayed on his knees and wept and cried before his crucifixion. This is the same place David walked through, weeping and crying and in deep mourning as he's leaving the city, fleeing from Absalom, the same place. Okay. And then it was about this time that David heard that Ahithophel had switched sides and was now the advisor to Absalom. Can you imagine the blow to his heart? Like, oh no, I'm sunk now. But listen to what he said, his response to this. He prayed, "Lord, turn Ahithophel's counsel into foolishness." He was still trusting in the Lord to work in these difficult circumstances. And almost the very next thing, a guy shows up, Ahushai the Archite, and he is faithful to David, and he was willing to leave with David as well, and he was doing that too. But David saw this as the answer to his prayer, the help that God provided, and he took that help when it was offered. And he said, "Hushai, I need you to go back to Jerusalem, and I need you to present yourself like you're going to serve Absalom, and I need you to confuse the counsel of Ahithophel so that, there's confusion there, and maybe God will use that to confuse that counsel, and this will be the answer to my prayer." And so that's what Ahushai did. Excuse me. He went to Jerusalem to be a counselor as well to King, the would-be King Absalom. So we see that once again, Lord is still at work in these difficult circumstances, and nothing is a surprise to God. He knew all this would happen, and he's providing help, and David was willing to take it so he could take advantage of that help. At both places, David had the choice to make. He could accept that help that God was providing, or he could have just skated on and said, "Nope, I could do this on my own." But David knew he couldn't, and so he accepted the help when it was offered. All right. So, as predicted, Absalom comes into Jerusalem, and he does it with all kinds of pomp and circumstance and makes it very public, and it's some of the things he does are to really show he is more he's setting himself up to look more powerful than his father, in very visible ways of saying, "I have conquered David." Yikes. But at this time, Hushai the Archite came and bowed before him and was able to get a place in that circle of counselors that Absalom is listening to, which is good because Ahithophel's there too. Remember, like the counsel of the word of God himself. So Ahithophel gives this advice, and everybody's like, "Wow, that's great advice." And this is part of what David was afraid of, because Ahithophel told Absalom, exactly, do this, and this, and you've got this covered. You will defeat David. All the people will be behind you, and it will, not as much bloodshed, and it will all be great. This is what you need to do. All right. And like I said, then you'll kill David and it'll be all set. It'll be in the bag. Well, thankfully, God is still at work and used that help provided, because Absalom and his council was all like, "Oh, this is really good." Oh, but let's wait and see what Hushai thinks. So they call Hushai the Archite and say, "Okay, this is what Ahithophel said. What do you think?" Whew, my goodness, this is where it all comes down. And here's, I love this so much. This is what Hushai said. He said, "Yes, that's very that's interesting, but in this case, he's wrong, because you know that your dad David is a mighty man, and him and his mighty men are strong and fierce warriors, and they're by now they would have already taken a strong position. They'll be hiding in caves and ready to go, and you're not going to be able to defeat them. And if you go and try, then they will defeat you and make you look bad. Instead, here's what you need to do. You need to gather all of Israel to you, and you, Absalom, lead the people yourself into battle. And that's how you're going to win. And that'll make you look good, and it'll be much better that way. You need to do it that way." And that's really good, because remember, Ahithophel's advice was like that of the word of the Lord. And had they attacked and followed his plan, David and his people would have been tired and caught by surprise, and he would have died. But thankfully, Absalom listened to the counter advice of Ahushai, and Ahushai was able to get word through the spies to David and say, "You need to get out of there, because they're going to come and get you. You need to hightail it out of there. Hurry up." And so he got word to Zadok and Abiathar, who sent some runners to go tell David, and they were seen. And word got back to Absalom that spies had gone to warn David. But thankfully, the spies were able to escape, because God is still at work in providing help even to the spies getting word to David to hightail it out of there. And God is still at work providing the help we needed. All right. And David was able to escape to safety. Then Ahithophel saw that his advice was not being followed, and this is not going to end well for him. So he went home and put all his affairs in order and killed himself. Yikes. But this is great. One of the other ways that God provided the help is twice in this process, people brought all kinds of food and supplies to David and the people that were following him to provide for their physical needs as well. And God does that for us too. In addition, another way that God is still at work in difficult circumstances is he is working out his sovereign plan. God still has a plan. Even when, what we see is like this, it's like tunnel vision. We get tunnel vision. We always see as our problems. But God sees the bigger picture, and he is still at work in the bigger picture. Check this out. David was calling his troops. A new battle was coming. So David was getting his folks ready to go, and he was like, "I'm going to lead you in a battle myself. I'm going to go with you. I'm going to battle with you myself." And the people said, "Oh, no. It's okay if we die, but if you die, all hope is lost. You need to stay here and be ready to support us from the safety of the city. Let us go and fight for you." And David said, "Well, if you think that's best, well then okay, but you sure?" But okay. And so he sent them off, and before they left, the king told the commanders, there were 3 commanders of the army, Joab, Abishai, and Ittai. And he said, "Be gentle with the young man Absalom for my sake." And everybody in the battle, on his side, all the troops heard the orders that king gave concerning Absalom to the commanders. So they armed themselves up for battle, and this battle took place there in the forest of Ephraim. That's a little confusing that the forest of Ephraim is not in the tribe of Ephraim, but it's okay. But anyway, that forest setting was terrible for battle. And scripture says that the forest itself took out a lot of soldiers in addition to those that were actually killed in battle. So, I mean, it was rough fighting conditions there. But this is important because of what happened to Absalom. He was riding on a donkey, and as he rode under an oak tree with really long, low branches, excuse me, his thick hair caught in the tree, and the mule kept going, and he was left hanging there in the tree, unable to go anywhere because his hair was caught in the tree. Isn't that weird? Okay, so he's left hanging there, and his enemy soldiers, the David soldiers, come and see him there, but they remember what the king said, and they didn't touch him. Instead, they sent word back to Joab and said, "Dude, we saw him. He's hanging by the tree. He can't go anywhere." And Joab said, "Well, why didn't you kill him?" They said, "We remember what the king said. We're not going to do that." But Joab still killed him because he knew that was what was best. And so Absalom did die in battle. I want you to notice it was God's plan for Absalom's rebellion to be crushed and David to remain king. David didn't want that to happen. He wanted his son to live. But God knew that was not the way to continue to keep David as king. And so even though it's not what David wanted, it is what God needed to continue to progress his plan, his sovereign plan that he already knew needed to happen. And so sometimes what we want is not what God wants. But he is always working out his sovereign plan. And remember, he wants what is best for us. He loves us. He wants what's best for us. But sometimes what is best for us is not what we want. But God is still working out his plan. Finally, in hard, difficult circumstances, the Lord is still at work in difficult circumstances by working on our heart. Remember, David didn't get what he wanted. And he grieved deeply when he found out his son was dead. There's great musical music that has been written over his lament there at the end of chapter 18. Oh, my son Absalom, Absalom, my son, if only I had died instead of you. Oh, Absalom, my son, my son. And because he was grieving so deeply for his son, all the victorious soldiers had to sneak and creep back into Jerusalem like they had been whipped, like out of embarrassment because they won. It was not right. And Joab saw this and he's like, this is not right. So he had some firm words for David. Check this out. Starting chapter 19, verse 5. Today you have humiliated all your men who have just saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and concubines. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear that the commanders and the men mean nothing to you, all the people that fought for you. I see that you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead. Now go out and encourage your men. I swear by the Lord that if you do not go out, not a man will be left with you by nightfall. This will be worse for you than all the calamities that have come upon you from your youth until now, which was quite a bit. So thankfully the king listened and God used that to change his heart. And he went and was able to thank and take his rightful place and respond correctly to the people who had saved his life. And the rest of Israel found out that how all this went down. They went, oh man, Absalom's dead. And then they started to remember, David did save us from the Philistines and he did all these other things for us. That wasn't so bad. Maybe we should bring him back. Hi, Chihuahua. Anyway, they did. They brought David back to be king and brought him back to Jerusalem. So when you're in a hard place, whether that's right now or coming up soon or just came out of one, I want you to ask God to show you what he's doing and look for how God is still at work in your difficult circumstances. Did I miss one? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you want to follow this series, check out this playlist. And this is a psalm that David wrote during this difficult time. Don't forget to subscribe. We post memory verses in 4 translations, key passages, answers to Bible questions, and more. Check out our store and freebies at parentroadmin.com. We love you, friends. See you next time.